The time was the spring of 1924. In the quiet northern German city of Hanover, the horrors of the First World War were not over, but another terror gripped the entire city. This fear is not of a war, but of a brutality much more than the brutality of war. Groups of young boys continue to disappear from the city, and rows of skulls are recovered from the banks of the river. When the housewives got suspicious about the meat bought from the market, the housewives started approaching the police with the meat. The story of a werewolf began to spread from mouth to mouth, from the busy citizen, the old, the rambunctious youth to the groups of children. Everyone is terrified of this werewolf. But the city authorities were not listening to this werewolf. They dismissed the werewolf story as mere mass hysteria. Even on the 17th of May, when children discovered several skulls on the banks of the Lynn River, the incident was dismissed as manipulation by medical students. Although there was no supernatural werewolf, a supernatural werewolf did exist. His name is Fritz Haarmann, who was accused of everything from raping young boys to selling their flesh, all of which were proven. Fritz was a German serial killer. In addition to being a werewolf, he is also known as the Butcher of Hanover and the Vampire of Hanover. Fritz Haarmann did not do these things alone. His accomplice in this work was Hans Granz, who encouraged Fritz to commit more murders. But more about Hans later. Let's look first at the original culprit, Fritz Haarmann. Fritz was born on October 25, 1889, in Hanover, Germany. Although known as Fritz, his full name was Friedrich Heinrich Karl Haarmann. After giving birth to Fritz, his mother became infertile. Fritz loved his mother very much and hated his father just as much. Fritz's hatred of his father is intensified when, as a child, his father tries to put him in a lunatic asylum. But the doctors refuse to put him in a madhouse. According to them, Fritz Rogach is not crazy. Fritz spent his entire life as a traveling salesman. Growing up, he wandered from city to city in search of income. The police and criminals of the city knew him well. Criminals were known because Fritz treated them very kindly and helped the poor in various ways. And the police liked him because he behaved well with the police and followed all the rules of the prison. But there was another reason why the police liked him. Because of his secret connections with various criminal gangs, he used to bring secret information about those gangs to the police. That is, once Fritz became an informer of the police, the railway station was crowded with refugees. The homeless destitute people came in groups and took shelter in this station. Lack of food, lack of shelter, they have to fight every day to survive. There were many young boys in the crowd of these people. Some of them came here with their parents, some ran away from home. Fritz knew how to handle these guys. Fritz listened to their sorrows with his heart. Sometimes he won their hearts by giving them good advice, sometimes by showing greed. Those boys, who are lost from this innumerable group of destitute people, no one will ever come to look for them. He used to give chocolates, cigarettes, and food to these boys. They were sometimes even brought to him with the lure of one meal and a good place to sleep. He used to torture and rape these unfortunate boys. Then he killed them by biting their throats. But no, it doesn't end there. He skinned the corpses, cut the flesh into pieces, and sold them in the market. And the skulls and bones were thrown into the River Lynn. Later, the skulls and bones were recovered from the banks of the River Lynn, and the story of werewolves spread by word of mouth. In September 1919, Fritz met a 20-year-old boy named Hans Granz. Hans himself had run away from home. Fritz took this handsome boy as his assistant and continued his work with full vigor. The number of his murders also increased than before. Newspapers began reporting on missing children in Hanover. One newspaper reported that the number of missing had risen to 600. As mentioned earlier, on May 17, 1924, rows of skulls were recovered from the banks of the Lynn River. Another skull was found on May 29. 6 more were found on June 13. On July 24, while playing in the field, some boys found several remains in a sack. Later, about 500 bones were recovered from there. According to the police, Fritz and Hans committed at least 2 murders a week in the 16 months before their arrest. Even after the presentation of so many numbers, there is still a problem. How was Fritz avoiding the eyes of the police even though he was moving freely in front of the public and living very close to the River Lynn? Fritz was a reliable man to the police. He used to collect accurate information about various criminal gangs thoroughly. By collecting this news of the criminal world, his new nickname became Detective on everyone's lips. At 1923 he made himself indispensable to the police. Later, he opened a large intelligence agency with high-ranking police officers. The parents of many missing boys last saw their son with the detective. Even if those parents were taken to Fritz's room, there would be no evidence. The police didn't take their confidant Fritz too seriously either. Back in Hanover, Fritz started a new business. His job was to sell used clothes and meat. He used to buy and sell goods at low prices from wholesalers. The townspeople soon learned that Fritz had good things at low prices, but yes, after selling the good stuff at first, Fritz started selling the dead bodies of those boys instead of meat. But no one doubts him. A neighbor of his on the banks of the Lynn River became suspicious when he saw a bucket of blood in his hand and sent the pork he bought from him to the police for testing. But there was nothing suspicious there either. No one suspected the blood stains in her room or the sound of meat being cut from her room. For he was a butcher and dealt in meat. So, it is not uncommon for him to have a bucket of blood in his hand or the sound of meat being cut coming from his room. When Fritz tries to get intimate with a boy named June from on the 22nd of 1924, the boy protests. At one point he had a fight and scuffle with the boy. After that, the police arrested him and took him to the headquarters. His house was searched and piles of old clothes and meat were found. Again, Fritz claims that it is not unusual to find these in his house, as he is a meat and old clothes dealer. But in the meantime, a mother finds her son's clothes in a pile of clothes. After that, the police started investigating. On December 4th, Fritz and Hans were brought to court for the murder of a boy between the ages of 27 and 18. Fritz is asked, "How many people have you killed so far?" He replied, "Maybe 30 to 40. I don't remember the exact number." He was then further asked, "How do you kill your victims?" "I used to bite them in the throat," he replied nonchalantly. The jury sentenced him to death. His accomplice Hans was sentenced to life imprisonment. Fritz cursed his father until he died. He was executed by beheading on April 15, 1925. He was sentenced to death for murdering 24 to 27 people. But the true number of Fritz Haarmann's murders is still unknown.